The idea that people are much more interested in doing business with people they like, people they feel connected with, rather than sort of looking for just the perfect product. I think sometimes you're actually willing to take a lesser product if you love the person and you trust the person who you're dealing with.
Welcome, everybody, to the podcast. Brilliant. I've got Matthew Dix with me. His book is amazing. I read it late last year. Stories Sell. And man, the way he put it together, it makes you want to reread it, study it, take notes, and say, this is going to be my business plan for the next 5 years at least. Because if you're paying attention to what's happening out there, the world moves around social media, and social media moves around stories. And that's where your brand needs to be. So, Matthew, welcome to the show.
Thank you. You're making me think I should have charged more for the book. If it's going to be your 5-year business plan, I don't know what I was thinking.
Dude, you should have. You totally should have, because as soon as I finished, I sent out a copy to three of my friends. And then I said, listen, you're going to have to read this and take notes, because you also, as you get further into the book, I feel like it's a manual, because you're like, hey, this is how you should track stories. And I'm like, how come I never thought of that? So yeah, let's I'm going to start with reading a piece of your book that will really lay the foundation of how you function. At least that's how I think. And
Sure.
here it is. I highlighted it. It says, while our competitors were selling their ability to mix songs, match beats, choose the latest, greatest hits, and stage elaborate light shows, we rarely spoke about the music. Instead, we let clients get to know us. I talked about my job as a teacher, my love for my dog, my inability to play golf well, and my Boston roots. We told stories about Benji the dog, I'm assuming,
Benji, yep.
Benji and me first meeting on a Saturday morning while working at McDonald's as teenagers, and how we bonded over our mutual love of Adventures of the Gummy Bears, a Saturday morning cartoon. By the way, one of the best theme songs ever. So that lays the foundation, I feel, for the whole book, because it's almost, when I talk to business owners and we're going over their brand and everything, they want to talk about features, and they want to talk about how amazing this and that and this is, and you're like, no, 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 no. Let's go the other way. Tell me this idea that you got.
Sure. Well, that was our wedding DJ company that Benji and I launched in 1997. Didn't know anything about the industry, but we both knew how to tell a good story. And so, it was the idea that people are much more interested in doing business with people they like, people they feel connected with, rather than sort of looking for just the perfect product. I think sometimes you're actually willing to take a lesser product if you love the person and you trust the person who you're dealing with. So, we knew that we were not very good or even adept at mixing music or collecting music in the way those DJs did back then before music was sort of ubiquitous. You actually had to have a collection of
Mm,
music, and we knew our collection wasn't as big as everyone else's. Basically, we didn't know what we were doing, but we knew that if people liked us, if people trusted us, if they felt connected to us, they'd want us there on their wedding day,
mm.
and all that other stuff doesn't really matter as much as our ability to sort of solve a problem and make sure something's running smoothly and using some common sense and ensuring that their day was special. So the music was fine. And, no one really remembers whether you beat matched perfectly one song into another. But,
Yeah.
if there's a fight in the kitchen between two of the chefs and one of them gets stabbed in the leg, which happened once, it's great to have the DJ contact the police and say, hey, can you come around the back instead of coming around the front? Because there's a wedding going on and we're trying to keep this incident away from the bride and groom. And so
Yeah.
that is what Benji and I did for 25 years. We ran weddings by making sure that the day was special and the music was fine.
I love that, man. All right, in running this this fun side gig, which was probably your main gig for a little while. It,
No, never really our main gig. I mean, I hate the phrase side gig because when you're doing someone's wedding on that day, it's just as important as anything you've ever done. But, I was an elementary school teacher and still am. So, I've been teaching for 27 years. So, if anything, teaching was my main gig and DJing was my side gig, at least on days that I wasn't actually at a wedding.
but you were fully present in both. I can see that. So,
Yes, yes. I actually always push back on phrases like side hustle. If you have a side hustle, like put it aside because you're not taking it seriously enough. If you have four jobs and one of them's a side hustle, it's a job and you're either taking it seriously or you should not be doing it. So,
oh,
I'm a teacher, I'm an author, I'm a consultant. I'm still a wedding DJ to this day. I officiate weddings. I have a lot of hats and I take every one of them seriously. So when someone says those are interesting side hustles, I say none of them are side hustles. They're all serious endeavors that I engage in meaningfully when I'm actually doing them. And, you know, to denigrate them as a side hustle always frustrates me. I try to
I,
push people into the way of proclaiming themselves to be the thing they are, even if it is, for 10 hours a week rather than 40 hours a week.
I love that look on it, man. I don't think I've ever had anybody tell me that, and I like it. It
Thanks.
makes sense. So thank you. So tell me about when you connect with bigger brands or companies. As I know in the book, you mentioned it a few times that you've helped out different brands and consulted in that way. But when they're looking to focus on data and discounts and they're pressuring you, how do you turn that around and say, hey, can we take a step back and maybe use the data and anything else you've got to tell a story? How do you do that? Because you explained it in the book, right? But I want people listening in to understand how to do that.
Well, sometimes, to be honest with you, I teach them how to turn the data into a story. So, we need to take the numbers and actually make them meaningful because people are not primed to remember a number. But if we attach an image or an emotion to a number, then it can become very meaningful. So sometimes when they're hooked on their data, I transform the data into something that is story-like. But when I can, I am trying to encourage businesses, whether it is a small business or, someone like Microsoft, who I'm working with right now. I'm trying to get them to take a more global view on what they're doing, rather than sort of drilling down into this one specific feature on this one product or even this one product. Let's talk first about sort of what are your core principles, and then from that, let's tell a story and let's make sure that's a story that's in the truest sense of a story, meaning we're going to have some change over time. We're going to try to include stakes and suspense and surprise and dare we say humor if that's something that I can actually get a corporate entity to embrace in some meaningful way. It comes down to the idea that when you tell a story, you become unforgettable. You become different than everybody else who's speaking. Most people speak in ways that are round, white, and flavorless, which means utterly forgettable, right? And the only people who we kind of remember are storytellers. That's why you can remember a movie that you saw when you were 10, even though
Mm.
you haven't seen it since you were 10. But you probably can't remember the last HR workshop or even the last, conference that you attended. You can't remember the speech delivered at your high school or college graduation, even those were really important days in your life, unless a story was embedded within one of those talks. All of that's forgotten. But you can remember a book, you can remember a movie, you can remember television shows because those are stories. Our brains are primed for them, they're wired for them. When it can convince a business that all those things are true, then I can start to leverage some of the tools of storytelling and help them do better business than they're doing right now.
And it's interesting on that point too, that we also rewatch movies that we love. We'll sit down and I'll rewatch Indiana Jones and Star Wars, and I'll be like, I'm watching it again.
Yeah, but you've never asked to watch a pitch deck for a second time, right?
That's
Never
true.
happened, right? You rarely say, I want to see that TED Talk a second time, right? Unless it contains a story that is meaningful in some way. These are not things you want to watch again. As I said, our brains are primed for stories. For all of human existence, except for the very tiny little fraction of time we're living in now, we couldn't write anything down. So every story that was ever told for 99.9% of human existence was told orally. So our brains are wired to hear stories and remember them. They were our survival technique. It's why we are dominating the planet today. There are animals that definitely should have eaten us a long time ago. But because we can pass information from one generation to the next, we managed to take over the planet. And honestly, we did it through story. If I tell you a story, your brain releases five chemicals that cause you to become more enamored with me, more connected to me. It increases your motivation, your focus, your memory. All of these things happen. And it's not magic, it's evolution. It is the idea that if I tell you a story, your brain says, oh, this might keep me alive. Pay attention to what this guy
Mm.
is saying, right? And so if we just acknowledge the science behind storytelling, it's crazy not to tell a story because I can leverage brain chemistry all day long by telling stories. It's how I get kids to do long division for me with enthusiasm. It's probably how I got my wife to agree to marry me. I just told her stories until she decided that I was the one,
This guy's
and
pretty good.
yeah, really. Someone once asked me, when did you first start falling in love with Matt? And I was happened to be present when the question was asked. And I assumed she was going to say something like, well, take one look at him. How could I not? And she said, nope, it was never that. Sadly, it was a dinner we had in Chili's when we were still just friends. She pointed out to someone that if you ask me a question, I tell a story. And that night, she had asked
Mm.
me questions and I told stories. And the thought occurred to her that if I marry this guy, I am always going to be entertained. And she saw great value in that. So, hopefully, eventually, some of my physical characteristics, won her over as well. But if it was storytelling, at least it's on brand.
That's funny. How do we get to telling stories better? Because one of the things you mentioned in the book is you give this idea of jotting down a story a day,
Yeah,
indefinitely. And I started in December on and off, dude. I'm not great at it, but I go back to it when I see it in my calendar. I'm like, oh, story. That's right.
right.
How do we first engage in that and then pull from those stories? Because I'm personally having a challenge pulling those stories so I know where to tell them. And there's a difference between anecdotes and stories. I remember you
Yes.
writing that too. So take
Yep.
us through that.
Sure. So what you're talking about was homework for life, which is, I think, the most important thing I teach in the world. Honestly, I teach fifth graders today, and I still think homework for life, which I teach them as well, is the most valuable thing. It's the acknowledgement that every day contains something worth holding on to and probably speaking about, even if it's not a story. It's a moment that is worth remembering. We often say that time flies, life is short. I can't believe how quickly that year went by. None of that's true, right? The problem is we just don't remember anything. If you just ask someone who is incarcerated or someone who does fifth grade recess duty once a week if time flies, we'll tell you no, it does not fly, right? Time goes by very slowly. It goes by unaccounted for. And so what happens is if I ask you, how many days in, let's say, 2022 can you remember just 3 years ago? If I give you 10 minutes, write down all the moments you can remember from 2022. If you're really good, you might get 50. If you're really good, if I give you access to your calendar, maybe you get 75. But most people probably remember about 20 things, which means we take a 365-day year and we shrink it to 22 days, and therefore time feels like it flies. But if you do
Yeah.
homework for life, which is the acknowledgement that even if you're not finding a story every day, you're finding a moment worth holding on to, something that you want to remember, whether it's a snippet of dialogue or something you saw or even something you thought that you've never thought before. When those things become valuable to us, and they are valuable, our time slows down, our days get remembered, and then we have the content we need when we need to tell a story so that when we develop a new product or a service, or we're looking for investment in our company, or we're just having dinner with someone who we want to have influence over or convince them that we're worth listening to, we'll have a story that we can share because we have an arsenal of stories because we're spending our days taking note of our days, and we don't write the whole story down. That's crazy. I actually have an app now. So good news for you. You can go to the App
Oh,
Store
your
and
app?
yeah, my app, Homework for Life. You can set a reminder so that now every night at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock or 8 o'clock,
Ooh,
it's going to pop up and say, what was your homework for life moment?
that's
And you can
smart.
record it and make it easy. The importance of homework for life is we're not writing the whole story down because that's a chore. And a lot of people don't like writing, and a lot of people don't have time for a new chore. So what I'm asking for is 5 minutes a day to reflect on your day and to take hold of the things that we need you to remember so that you can have them later on. So they're short. Before I had my app, I was essentially using a spreadsheet. two columns. One column had the date, and then I stretched the B column across the screen. And in the B column, that's all I did. Just that much.
When you wrote that, when I was reading it in your book, you explained, I was like, listen, Matt, I'm talking to you on the book. I don't know if I can do this shit because it's on an Excel sheet. And I'm like, dude. So I went to an app, not knowing I'm gonna get your app right now. I got a
Yeah.
little baseball cap and a pen, right?
Pen, yes. Yep.
Uh, I went to an app called Day One. It's a
Yeah.
journal app, and
Yeah.
I was like, you know what, stories. I'm gonna put them here. But this, I'm downloading it right now, man. Thank you.
That's great. It has an AI feature that's actually trained on me. So one of your problems is how do I leverage these moments into story, right?
Yes.
There's an AI feature on the app so that you can ask the AI, what would Matthew Dick say about this moment? Is this a story? And if so, what kind of story might this be? So, it's not going to always give you the greatest Matthew Dick's wisdom, but it's going to at least give you a start. Essentially what we're looking for is not necessarily stories all the time. I used to look for stories, and I was really bad at homework for life initially. I invented it and I was bad at it because I was looking for stories. I was trying to find a story every day.
Yes. Yes.
Now, what I do is I just look for moments worth remembering. So I've gone from one moment per day back in 2011 when I started this. Now I record about 8 moments per day because I
Whoa.
see more, right? It's not because my life is more interesting, but I just see more moments that I want to hold on to, whether that is my son says something hilarious or I see something or I smell something. Today I took students on a field trip to a pool, right? It's the end of the year, it's this annual trip we have. And at one point during the day on this path, this concrete path up to the pool, there was a pair of underwear, kids' underwear on the middle of the path. And I
Okay.
sat in my chair and I watched kids walk back and forth over this pair of underwear. That was definitely one of my students' underwear. It's definitely a pair of underwear for my students. And I just kept watching them. Now, it's a homework for life moment because somewhere along the way, one of my students lost his underwear out of his bag and decided it's not worth the shame of picking it up. And so he went back to school commando today, right? I don't know which one of those kids it was, but that's a moment of amusement that's not going to qualify as a story necessarily. But if
Okay.
I end up telling a story someday about the idea that, shame is a powerful tool, and sometimes we're willing to overlook things that are a little embarrassing to us in a way that might not be so profitable to us. In other words, we end up not wearing underwear for the rest of the school day because we're too ashamed to pick up the underwear on the path, right?
Mhm.
It becomes an element of a story. So sometimes it's just a thing I hear, a thing I see. Sometimes gloriously, it's an actual story. And that's wonderful too. That's going to be something that has change over time that touches me in a
Yeah.
meaningful way. They happen all the time too. And most of the time, people don't see them because they're doing homework for life like you're doing it, which is sporadically, meaning you're not getting very good at it. It's sort of
Yeah.
like you're shooting free throws every other Thursday, thinking you're going to get better at shooting free throws, right? And
Dude.
it's just not the way to do it, right? You gotta do it every day in order to hone the lens and start to see that that underwear on the path is actually a moment you're going to want to hold on to, and
Got it.
then you start to see the value in it someday. Because I can tell an amusing story about homework on the path, right? If I'm working with a leader and I can see that this leader is sort of like ignoring a problem that he doesn't
Yeah.
want to deal with, and I can say, I see that you're dealing with a problem and you're kind of ignoring it because it's difficult to deal with. Let me tell you about a pair of underwear I saw a couple years ago on a path and how kids ignored that problem too, right? And
Mm,
how that ended up yielding a kid sitting at a desk with no underwear on, probably pretty uncomfortable for the rest of the day, right? That kid was just as foolish as you're being right now. And you see, combine those two moments, and now we've got magic. Now we have story, we have amusement, we have something to remember, all of this.
yeah.
We lose all of this content that our lives are filled with because we just don't take time to actually record it.
You remind me of a quote. I wrote it down right now because I had to look it up in my notes. When I talked to Seth Godin, um, he says, you can't be seen until you learn to be seen. And I
Yeah,
was like, that's kind of like what you're telling me, man. Like,
right. I actually will stretch it a little and I'll say, let's take what Seth said and say, you can't be seen until you begin to see, right? Until you start to see. So to be seen, you have to have something to say. So I like what Seth says, which is you can't be seen until you learn how to be seen. Essentially, you can't be seen until you're telling stories. But you can't tell stories until you start looking around and actually
yeah,
taking note of the stuff around you that's worth speaking about.
that's true, man. That's true. I added that to the quote. Now I got you in there.
Great. So a blend of me and Seth Godin is
Why
quite an
not?
honor for me. And
Why
probably
not?
not as much an honor for Seth, but
Nah, yeah, it is, man. It is. Come on. I love what you said when you're talking about the storyteller connecting with the audience. This was all new to me as I'm reading this in your book, that the audience has this connection with the speaker, not just through the chemicals that we're releasing, but an actual connection. And I was like, there's no way. So I went off on a tangent, right? Obviously. And then I went in and did more research. I'm like, there is no freaking way, dude. So can you explain or expand on that connection that you talked about or wrote about?
sure. Well, I'll explain it, but I'll just sort of I'll give you some examples that are fairly, obvious. For a long time, for example, people felt a deep connection to Oprah Winfrey because every day at 4 o'clock she came on their television and said things to her. And to this day, even though she's been off the air for more than 3 decades, they still feel deeply connected to Oprah because for a couple decades they spent time with her. There's a podcaster named PJ Vogt who used to do this great podcast called Reply All, and the podcast sort of fell apart, and it was a podcast on the internet essentially. And then
Okay.
PJ resurfaced about a year later. I didn't even know what his podcast was about, but I heard that PJ had a new podcast. I immediately subscribed. Why? Because I wanted to spend time with PJ because I felt connected to him. For about 2 years, I
Mm.
listened to him every week and I got to know him as a person. I understood him. I understood what he cared about. And so when I find out he's going to be somewhere else, I just think it doesn't matter what the content is. I want to spend time with this guy. So that's the idea that we all have connections with people like this. There's actors and late night comics and people who talk to us that we feel connected to. This happens all the time. I mean, the proof is, or the evidence is, when you speak to an audience in a meaningful, vulnerable way, you will discover very quickly that people will share things with you that are sort of astounding and sometimes disconcerting. You can establish connection very quickly through a story. It is not uncommon for me to tell a story on a stage or even tell a story actually over Zoom to a group of people and then immediately get contacted either in person if I'm on a stage or even through an email if I'm on Zoom from someone who now needs to share something with me. And so if I tell a story about bad parenting, back in 2019, I told a story about like doing a dumb thing as a parent. I stepped off the stage, a woman came up to me and she said, without even introducing herself to me, she said, every time I go into someone's house, even my own mother's house, I have to steal something. And
Mm.
then she pulled me in and whisper yelled at me. She said, I've never told anyone that before. So that's a 40-year-old woman with mental illness who sees me be vulnerable and artful and crafty on a stage telling a true story about my life. And she decides he's the one I'm going to tell. And that happens to me all the damn time. Now, if
Damn.
I had wanted to sell her something at that moment, she would have bought anything I had to sell,
Of course,
right?
yeah. But you
Yes,
don't because this is what I love about you. In the book, I could totally tell you're authentic and sincere. It's like this guy's real. I love this guy.
right. Now, I'll tell you, though, it certainly helps me in terms of, the business that I do. If I'm a person telling stories on stages and wherever I am, I connect with people and I'm never sort of selling my wares. I'm not trying to get people to buy my books or my courses or hire me to speak at their company. I'm just trying to get them to like me, to feel connected to me, to feel like if I was having dinner with someone, he'd be a person I'd want to have dinner with. And I
Hmm.
can tell you that that act of simply connecting to people yields book sales and sales of my courses and my workshops and invitations to come speak at companies and at conferences and things like this. You can be a salesperson who says, here's the thing I have to sell, buy it, here's all the reasons why you should buy it. Or you can be someone who says, hi, I'm sort of a regular human being who's more vulnerable than most and I can tell a good story and I want to hear about you as well and I want to respond to you in a meaningful way so that you feel like we have an honest to goodness connection. And then, by the way, if you ever want anything that I sell, it's over here. But feel free to ignore it and spend more time with me. And I think that is a confident way to sell things. I think the less confident way is to sort of show your shiny things as much as possible and hit people 3 times. And I think that feels pretty thirsty to me. When people try to sell me things like that, I think, you know, this can't be that good or you wouldn't be trying so hard, you know?
Yeah. And unfortunately, most of the people sell it that way, man. That's the hard.
Right. So I had all the windows in my house replaced and it was expensive. I had a lot of windows. So I had five companies come through my house.
Okay.
And I didn't buy the best windows or the most expensive windows. I bought Trevor Devine's windows from Window World. And I bought them because he came into my house and he saw my 7 iron leaning up against the wall because I'm constantly doing this drill with my 7 iron. And he goes, "Oh, you play golf?" And I said, "Yes." And so for 30 minutes, we talked golf. And then after
Yeah.
30 minutes, he said to me, "I should probably get my sample so we can check out what my window looks like." And I thought to myself, as long as it's made of glass, man, I'm buying your window because I like you. And then, because he's extra smart, as he gets up to go to get the sample, he sees a basket of knitting in the corner. And my wife's
Mm,
making dinner at the time. And he yells into the kitchen. He says, "Oh, do you knit?" And she says, "Yeah, I do. I knit and I sew." And he said, "Oh, my wife does too." And I said,
mm,
"That son of a bitch, look at him. He's going after her too, right? He's connecting. The
yeah.
best encyclopedia salesperson, the door-to-door people, the guy who was the most successful, he
Yeah.
once said that he made all of his sales in the first 10 seconds. He walked into the house, he identified something in the room that related to his life, and he connected to the people through that one object, whether it was, "Oh, you have a dog, I have a dog." Or, "Oh, I see that you like Dickens. I like Dickens. Oh, I see you have a golf club." Whatever it was, he found a means of connecting to people. And then he didn't really have to sell the encyclopedia anymore. He was really just selling himself and, his trustworthiness, his reliability, all of that. And so I bought Trevor's windows and it made sense and it was great. I actually bought doors from him too. And so when one of my doors got loose one day, because it happens, and I was worried that my cat might sneak out, I called Trevor, left a message saying, "I don't even know if these doors are under warranty, but can I arrange to have someone come and fix it before the cat gets out?" And an hour later, I got a call from Trevor, and he said, "I swung by the house and I fixed the door. It's fine now. I'll show you how to fix it
What?
next time." Right. That's how you sell doors and windows, right?
Wow.
Yeah. And that's why I say his name all the damn time. His name is Trevor Devine. He works for Window World. It's in Manchester, Connecticut. And I wouldn't buy a window from anyone else. And it's not the best window. It's not the cheapest window. It's Trevor Devine's window. And I think a lot of times that is why we buy things, is because the person we're speaking to is someone we trust.
That directly, so a large audience that I've got are real estate agents too.
Yeah.
So brokers, teams, and companies. And you're in Connecticut, dude. Your market is hot right now. Real estate market is hot, by the way. Just want
I,
to
I
let
agree. I look at Zillow and I go, my house is not worth this much money.
it's great. You're in the hottest market in the United States, just so you know.
Mhm. Yeah.
Uh, now I'm listening to you talk about Trevor. How do we, as business owners, replicate this? Because I think there's from what I'm listening to, there's two parts. One is the connection, the authentic connection, finding that piece that connects. That's one. And then once you're there, how is it that we complete it by telling a story so that we allow people to connect with us?
Yeah,
Is there,
it's important, especially for sort of real estate agents, even window salespeople, because their products are pretty similar. You're not differentiating yourself. Apple makes an iPhone. There wasn't like someone else making the iPhone. They had a new product.
yeah,
But one real estate agent versus another real estate agent, there's not a lot to differentiate. And I
true.
think that the way you differentiate is by making people trust you and believe that you're the person I want to spend time with, because that's essentially a real estate agent is a person you're going to spend time with. So, what I try to get people to understand is a concept called Grice's razor. And essentially, Grice's razor is, if you imagine an iceberg, right? The tip of the iceberg, what we can see, which is the smallest amount, that's what people say. And the biggest part of the iceberg, the one under the water, is what people mean. And those two things are often disconnected, meaning what people say and
Mhm.
what they're actually meaning, what the motivation behind what they're saying, are often two different things. And if you can sort of begin to strategically listen to people, meaning listen to what they say, but be asking yourself while they're saying it, what are they really trying to say? Then you can actually deploy a story that's going to mean something to people. Because most of the time, when people tell a story, what they do is they listen to someone talk about something that happened to them, and then they respond with something similar that happened, to the other person. So they're content matching, right? Someone tells you this happened recently. One of my friends got in a fender bender. right? She pulled out into an intersection, which she was allowed to pull out into, and someone sort of ran the red and clipped her car.
Mm.
And she was pretty upset about it. And she had her kid in the back seat, and it was fine. You know, they were both fine. The car had to go to the shop. They were in a rental, and I could tell
Hmm.
she was really upset about it when she came to work. So most of the time, if someone tells you about a fender bender, your instinct is to tell a story about your fender bender, and that's
Yeah.
called content matching, and it sucks
Oh,
because
don't do that. Got it.
correct. Do not do that. So the problem with content matching is it doesn't demonstrate any empathy because you're not speaking to the person's emotions, right?
Mm.
And oftentimes what happens is people feel like you're trying to one up them. I told you my car accident story, so now I'll tell you, I'll tell you one of my own, right?
It's
And
terrible.
so that's not the way to connect with people in meaningful ways. What you do instead is you strategically listen. So as I'm listening to my friend and I'm hearing what she said, I can tell, first of all, she's upset. So
Hmm.
not everyone is upset 3 days after a fender bender, but she is. So I start to ask myself as she's speaking, why is she so upset?
Yeah.
And I say to myself, well, maybe she's come to realize that like the world isn't as safe as she once thought it was. That jackasses are going to run red lights and put her in danger, right? Or maybe she's upset because her kid was in the backseat of the car and she's either blaming herself for putting her kid in danger or she's suddenly come to the realization that her kid lives in a dangerous world and she can't protect her kid. All of those thoughts went through my mind. So when she was done telling her story, if I felt certainty about how she was feeling, I would tell a story, not about a car accident, but a story that relates to that sort of theme, right? So if I thought she was worried and feeling guilty because she hadn't protected her child well enough, I would tell a story, not about a car accident, but about a time I felt guilty as a parent, right? And
Mm.
that's my means of saying, I heard what you said, and I also felt what you said, right?
Got it.
In this case, I wasn't quite sure, but I knew what question to ask because I was strategically listening. So I said to her, are you blaming yourself for that? Like blaming yourself for putting your kid in danger? And she said, no, no, that's not what it is. And I said, oh, good, because it really wasn't your fault. I said, are you thinking like the world is more dangerous now? And she goes, yeah, I'm starting to think like my kid is in this dangerous world and I can't protect her all the time. Right.
Oh,
And so then I think to myself, because I'm doing homework for life and I have a storehouse of stories, I think to myself, when was there a moment in my life when I didn't think I could protect my kid? And
mm.
definitely don't make it about a car accident because that's content
Ew.
matching. So instead, I say to myself, oh, I remember a time when Charlie, my son, was about 7 and he swallowed a marble, a metal marble. And I sort of panicked. My wife was the one who sort of held it together. And the paramedics came and we have this amazing x-ray of him with the marble. It's an x-ray with this giant white dot right in the middle of his body. And thankfully it wasn't a problem. He
Oh my
passed it,
God.
you know. But I told her, I said, I remembered thinking while the paramedics were checking him out that the world is filled with tiny things that this boy is going to stuff into his mouth.
Hmm.
And unless I watch him constantly, this might happen again. And it was really unsettling for me. And she said, yes, that's how I feel, right? And so I expressed empathy through a story by listening to what she was really saying. Grace's razor. I was listening to the bottom half of the iceberg. So, in a real estate example, if someone's telling you I need a bigger house, right? That's the tip of the iceberg. But if they're saying, I'm looking for a bigger house, like, why are they looking for a bigger house, right? Is there discord in the family because they just don't have enough space to sort of live properly? Or is this like the first time they actually had enough money to get a new house? And this is like a celebratory occasion, like we're now earning enough money or we've come into some money and we can actually like scale up our home in a way we've never done before, right?
Hmm.
So we don't want to just find out they need a larger home. We want to find out the why behind it. And that is often done through careful listening and occasionally, careful questioning, proposing an idea. When you propose an idea like, oh, do you want to move because like it's just getting too difficult for 5 people to live in this house and like, you're banging elbows? Is that what's going on? Right? People will instantly tell you whether it's true or not because they never want you to impose an untruth on them, like a fabrication, right? So if they're like, no, that's not what it is, they'll always tell you no, which is great because that's important information. And
Yeah.
they'll often correct you and tell you what it really is this, and now you know what it is. And now you know the theme or the meaning or the message they're trying to send. Not that I need a bigger home, but actually we came into a whole bunch of money and we have more money than we've ever had before, and we feel like now we can get a bigger home. And I would hear that and go,
Mm.
oh, let me find a story that I can tell about a moment where I had surprising good fortune and how great I felt about it. And honestly, right away the story comes to my mind. I remember the time in like 1994 when I was driving through the Emerald Square Mall parking lot and I saw $20 bills blowing across the road. And I told my buddy Benji to pull over, and we jumped out of the car and we ended up with $220 by the time we had done collecting the $20 bills, which back then, when we were as poor could be, was a windfall for us. And I would
Ooh,
tell her that story as an amusement, but to express to her, I understand how happy it is to find an unexpected sum of money that you can do something with. Now, in 1993, it was, a couple $100, but that actually was an enormous amount of money for me and Benji back then when we were eating elbow macaroni and couldn't afford to turn on the heat in our home, right? So, like, you found considerably more money than the $200 that Benji and I found, but I understand how exciting that can be. Right. And so again, I've listened to what she was saying on a theme, meaning, or message basis, and now I can connect with her. And she thinks she's been heard, not on a content level, but on a this guy really understands me level. That's what we're looking to do.
that's key, man. I put you tell stories to connect emotionally. So
Yes.
underneath is what's really happening. Interesting you say that because when when we do presentations for, it doesn't matter if it's like multi-millions or regular, most of the time we don't break out the presentation. So interesting. Like what you mentioned before, it's like nobody's going to remember the pitch deck, right?
Right.
People people want to engage and talk. That's all they want to do. And then they'll
Right.
determine based on that. That's so interesting. So
Yeah.
I just have to get better at telling stories, Matthew. That's the key. What would an easy framework be for someone listening in to say, I understand what a story should contain?
So the first thing we have to understand is what a story is,
Okay.
right? So most people sort of think of stories as something happened to me over the course of time, and now I will tell you what happened, and that will amount to a story. It's not.
That's
You
true.
know,
That's how it
it's
is.
reporting on your life, right? My daughter just did this to me tonight. My son and I were rolling our eyes at each other while she was doing it. I was wearing my Crocs and I was in a sack race at camp and a bug got into the sack and it got into my croc and it bit my foot and I have a little red mark on my foot now. And
That's
that's
how
what
I
she
tell
told us.
stories.
Right. So, it's fine because she's my daughter and she has a right to tell me what's going on in her day.
Yeah.
But, it wasn't a story and it was quite boring, you know?
Uh,
So a story is essentially change over time. It is, I once was a something and then some stuff happened and now I'm a different thing. Or I once thought of something and then some stuff happened and now I think something new, right? The trick to telling a good story is we start at the end of the story. We have to know what we're trying to say. A story is essentially comprised of what I call a 5-second moment, which is to say when we change, when we suddenly think differently or when we suddenly recognize ourselves to be different than who we once were, that happens instantaneously. It might take a long time to eventually come to that moment of realization, but if I suddenly decide that my mother was right all along, right? It might take me my lifetime to discover, oh my God, my mother was right. But the moment you realize it, it's instantaneous. You're just like, oh my
mm,
God, she was right,
yeah.
right? So we're looking for those moments. They occur in movies all the time, right? A character suddenly says, oh, this is what I have to do, right? They have a 5-second moment, right? It's
Gandalf putting the ring in. He's like, oh crap.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
It's the moment in Star Wars when Luke Skywalker turns off his targeting computer and
Uh-huh.
decides to use the Force, right? Which is really, it's a movie about religion. It's a movie about a boy who does not have religion, and then he meets Jesus, which is Obi-Wan Kenobi, And he teaches him that there's actually a religion that encompasses the universe known as the Force. And at the moment Luke Skywalker has all the technology at his hands to defeat evil, he turns all the technology off and instead uses the Force to defeat evil religion, right? That's
Dude.
his 5 second moment, right? There's also a 5 second moment for Han Solo in that movie, which is he should go pay off Jabba the Hutt and get out of trouble. And he's on his way to pay off Jabba the Hutt, and then something causes him to turn around, and it is friendship. He's never had friends before other than Chewbacca. He
Oh.
turns around, comes back, saves Luke by blasting Darth Vader out of the way and allowing Luke to use religion to defeat the enemy.
Dude, now you got me thinking. We see the same thing with Darth in part three, Return of the Jedi.
Correct. Yes. All movies, all characters in all movies, except for weird indie movies that appear to run out of film before they actually get to the end of the movie.
I hate those.
All of those movies, as silly or as serious as they are, all have characters who undergo a moment of, meaning, a 5 second moment, right? Um, if they don't, it's either a situation where they're not the main character, or you think they're the main character, but they're not. They're actually a fully realized person. So Obi-Wan Kenobi is a good example. In the first Star Wars movie, he doesn't change because he's fully realized, and that's why he dies, right? The same thing in Titanic, right?
Mm.
That's Rose's story. It's not Jack's story. In Titanic, Rose is a woman trapped in society and expectation. Her mother's forcing her to marry a man she doesn't want to marry to keep the family fortune intact. By the end of the movie, she's huddled on a blanket on the Carpathia, and the man she's supposed to be married is walking right by her and calling for her, and she's ignoring him because she's released all the idea of the trappings of wealth, right? But
Yeah.
Jack dies in that movie because that he's perfect right from the start. He has no growth to be made. Jack is a fully realized character from the very first scene, which is why when I was watching Titanic, I thought this dude is dead. Because if you open a movie with a fully realized character, someone who doesn't need to change over time, they're dead. They're going to die by the end of the movie because the only place they have to go is death. That's why Thelma and Louise ride off the cliff at the end of the movie
Yeah.
because they're
Yeah.
fully realized there's no other place for them to go. They're two bonded women who have found utter independence in the world, and the only place they have to go now is death because there's no growth to be made.
Hmm.
Right. All of this is to say, in our lives, we don't need to drive off cliffs or defeat the empire.
Yeah.
We just have to find a moment where we go, oh, wow, I just changed in a fundamental way. I just realized something about myself or my children or my business or a client. I just changed the way I live my life. Right. Those are the stories we're looking to tell.
Got it.
So we're finding those. And if we just do that, if we find the frame of a story, which means the beginning of the story and the end of the story are in opposition to each other,
Hmm.
right? If we just do that, we're better than most of the people telling stories today because most people don't do that at all. They usually start at some arbitrary place, usually chronologically relevant, and
Yeah.
then they usually don't end the story. Usually, what happens is they get interrupted, or the phone rings, or the meal's served, or the car ride ends. Storytellers are people that think, what am I trying to say? What's
Hmm.
the end of my story? And now, what's the opposite of me, my end? That's where I'll begin. In every story I tell, I think that way. What is the end of my story? What's the opposite of the end? And that's where I'll begin.
The opposite of the end.
That means that when you start watching movies with this frame in mind, this mindset in your head, you can start to figure out how the movie's going to end within the first 15 minutes, not with any specificity. But when Harry and Sally at the beginning of When Harry Met Sally say they hate each other, you
Yeah.
should know at the end of the movie they're going to love each other. That's how every romantic comedy works. Two people are not in love and then they end up in love. That's opposition, right? But all things are like this. Any character at the beginning of a movie, you'll say, what's their problem? What's their need? What's the flaw they have? What's the thing they have to overcome? By the end of the movie, they're going to fill that flaw, complete that need, solve that problem. All that's how movies, that's how books, that's how plays, that's how musicals, they all work the same way. Stories, this is how they operate.
I love that, man. That's actually a really good framework. It's simple to understand. In the book, you also talk about anecdotes. Can you
Yes.
explain what those are? Because until you made that distinction for me as I'm reading it, I thought I was telling stories, but they were
Right.
anecdotes.
So an anecdote isn't bad at all. It's a lovely thing. It's just often forgettable. Let's use actually the $20
Yeah.
the finding of the $200, right? I can tell that as a story or an anecdote, either way. The way I told it to you was sort of an anecdote, which is
Yeah.
I'm driving around the Emerald Square Mall, Emerald Square, Emerald Green, and we'll say Emerald Square Mall, and we see some $20 bills floating around. We pull over the car and we end up with $200, right? Joyous day for us. We drive home cheering, because now we have $200 that we didn't have before. That's an anecdote, right? And it's fine and it works. It gives you a lovely slice of life. There's no change. Did you see how I didn't change in that story over
Yeah.
time, right?
Yeah.
I no change whatsoever. It was just a lucky day, and I can use that to relate to someone if they're having a lucky day too. But if I want to tell it as a story, I could have told it like this. I could have begun the story talking about how Benji and I can't turn on our heat because we have no money. And I can
Mm.
talk about how we buy elbow macaroni at the grocery store when it's on sale for 5 cents a box. And literally, that's how we eat. It's so bad, I go to the library and look up scurvy because the internet doesn't exist in 93, because I'm worried that we might get scurvy if I don't buy fruits and vegetables soon, but we can't afford to buy them, right? And so I'm kind of feeling hopeless for a lot of that time. I'm feeling like I'm never going to get ahead in my life and that the universe is sort of pointed against me. And then
Hmm.
one day we're driving through the parking lot of a mall where we have literally no money to buy anything, and we see $20 bills fluttering around in the wind. And for a moment in my life, I think, you know what? Maybe there is hope. Like, you just never know when the universe will also sprinkle you with a little bit of good luck. And
Hmm.
maybe I should wake up every morning with a little more hope in my heart and
Mm.
a little more belief that maybe today will be a day that can be better than the day before. Now it's a story. Can you feel the difference between the two?
I can. You made me think of something that just happened, and I'm like, dude, I didn't see it before, but now I see what you add a lot more emotion to it because you're taking me through a transition.
Right. So one is, oh, I only have a minute to tell somebody the $20, the $200 story. So I've got a
Yeah.
minute to tell it or less than a minute. It's an anecdote. Hey, here's a funny thing that happened to me. You
Mm.
probably don't remember it. It probably is just fluff. It's delight, it's humor, it enlivens the moment. But if I tell it to you in the way I just told it to you, that sort of like beginning and end in opposition to each other,
Yeah.
hopelessness to hopefulness, it
Mhm.
allows you also to connect to your life. It allows you to think, oh, when was I hopeless? Or, oh, when did I find hope, right? And suddenly you find yourself connecting your life to mine because I've given you something to really connect with. In the anecdote version, you can only connect if you found money blowing around once or you came into some financial windfall like I did
Yeah.
that day. But if I actually tell a story, not about money blowing around, but about a boy who felt hopeless and then found hope one day, hope is a hell of a lot easier to connect with. We're much more likely to have moments of hopelessness and hopefulness in our lives than we are $20 bills blowing around in the wind.
Like the story of the accident wasn't necessarily about the accident, it was about helplessness.
Right. Yes. And we're much more likely to connect to that story and think, oh, we have something in common now, as
Yeah.
opposed to we have fender benders in common. You can feel that there's no depth of meaning there. But
Yeah.
in terms of like the fear of keeping our children safe, now
Mhm.
me and that colleague of mine, we're connected completely because we both have that same feeling of my son could swallow anything at any moment and she could get clobbered by a car in an intersection at any moment. We both feel unsafe.
Very true.
Yeah.
All right. So, how do we only got a few minutes left. How do we show up better on social media with the stories that we have? Because one thing that you made very clear in the book that I loved was listen, stop telling other people's story. That's history, right?
Right.
Tell
Yes.
your stories, be vulnerable, show up and connect with people that way. But how do we do that on social? Like
Yeah.
what should we do?
Do just what I've been talking about essentially. So let's say you're someone who is using social media to talk about leadership, right? You are a leadership guru looking to, create, a sphere of influence around yourself in relationship to leadership. If I was that person, I would have taken a photo of that underwear on the path today. I would have posted it on social. And I would have said, I watched 20 kids walk past this pair of underwear, all of them refusing to acknowledge it was theirs when it was definitely one of their pairs of underwear. I watch
Mm.
leaders do this all the time too. They ignore problems that are difficult or uncomfortable or challenging, and instead they deal with the simple problems, right? Are you a
Well,
person who's going to admit that it's your underwear? Or are you someone who walks by the underwear, right? Take a moment from my life, take a photo from the life, connect the moment in my life to the message I'm trying to send, right? Simple, memorable, not the kind of post you see on social all the time, right? That's a
well,
different kind of post. It's going to get attention. It's got a catch-worthy photo, right? A red pair of wet underwear on a path. Maybe a kid's, I'm not going to grab the kids' faces, but maybe the kids' feet walking by it, right? And then say, are you the kind of leader who ignores problems like these fifth graders are ignoring this pair of underwear? Or are you someone who tackles the difficult problems, even if it's going to make you feel a little awkward, a little embarrassed, maybe even a little ashamed that you're going to have to tackle this problem on this day? The best leaders in
yeah,
the world do, you know?
yeah,
So
make
do that. Just interrogate your day and say to yourself, what did I see? What did I think? What did I feel? And how can I relate what I'm seeing, thinking, feeling into what I'm trying to say as a leader? Right?
got you.
I'm trying to create a sphere of influence around storytelling. So I could easily just say on social today, my daughter told me about being bit by a bug while in a sack race, right? I love my daughter, but she bored me to death because it doesn't qualify as a story,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't qualify as a story because there's no change over time. And if that's a
Hmm.
message I was just trying to, there I go. Now I have a social post. By the way, that social post, I would write it better. I'd probably include a photo of the croc that she was wearing. But the secret to that post that people don't even realize is now I'm revealing I'm a father and I'm revealing that I'm the father of a daughter. So if you're a father, now we're connected in fatherhood. And if I have a daughter, we're connected with a daughter. And he goes, oh, he's got a daughter too. Now they feel more connected to me. So when I'm on any kind of a stage, whether it's a social media stage or an actual stage, or I'm writing on the internet, I'm always dripping biographical information into everything I write because I want
Hmm.
people to know that I'm a bad golfer and a cat lover and I've got a son and a daughter and a wife. Right. I want them to know that I love watching baseball and basketball. I want them to know I'm a Yankees and a Celtics fan and a Patriots season ticket holder, right? I want them to know all of these things because one of those things is going to hit, And so the more you can sort of just delineate in your life what your biography is and how it will be helpful to you in terms of connecting to other people, that's going to be enormously helpful to you too.
I love that, man. Thank
It's the
you.
difference between when you were a kid, you probably had teachers who were black boxes, which is they taught math and you never knew anything about them other than they were your math teacher,
Yeah,
which is crazy, right? Like I have teachers I didn't even know if they had kids or if they were married,
true.
And then you had the teacher who you sort of like knew everything, For me, Mr. Maroney, I knew he had a swimming pool in his backyard and I knew that he had neighbors swimming in it and he knew they were peeing in the pool and he was trying to figure out which one of them was peeing in the pool. You don't think I didn't love that guy and wanted to
Oh,
learn
dude, yeah.
French from him because of that, right? And that's just one thing that he dripped into my life, right? So we don't want to be black boxes on any stage, whether it's social media or it's speaking to a client or writing on the internet. We want people to know that we're parents and pet owners and sports lovers and knitters and runners and all of the things that we are. We should mention all of it subtly but strategically to let people feel more connected to us.
What's your favorite movie?
That's a terrible question to
I
ask me.
know, I know.
I am going to say right now, on this day only, my favorite movie is. Oh, God, you're such a terrible person.
Mm.
I'm going to say right now, at this moment, it's Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Oh,
But
okay.
ask me tomorrow and it might be something
Might be
different.
different. Uh,
Yeah.
Are you hoping for a Goonies too, or no?
I am not, because it's pretty perfect.
I love it. All right, cool. Me too. Feel the same way.
Yeah. You know what? I'm changing it. Now it's The Matrix is my favorite
The
movie.
Matrix. Wow, dude. Opposites, I think.
No, not at all. No, they're
Now
both
I have to go
brilliantly
to
made.
you explained Raiders of the Lost Ark in the book, the Ark. Now I have to go look at the Ark for the Matrix.
Just pay attention to the opening scene of The Matrix and Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's the same damn thing.
Okay, I
The
will.
opening scene of both of those movies is I'm throwing you into a world and it's not going to make total sense to you, but you're not going to be able to look away.
Yeah. Okay. I see
Yeah.
it. That's good. Matthew, thank you so much, man. I appreciate it.
It is my pleasure. I love talking about this stuff, so thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Thanks, buddy.